So let's now return to theology. Jesus was of course supposed to have raised several people from the dead, but what happened to them? They simply grew old and died again. Jesus' resurrection therefore had to be different, as it was the permanent end of death as a prototype of what is going to happen in the future. This is the reason why the Bible calls Jesus the last Adam. This is explained very well in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the firstfruits of those who have fallen asleep. For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead comes also through a man. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. So it is written, the first man Adam became a living being, the last Adam a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural, and after that the spiritual. The first man was of the dust of the earth, the second man from heaven. As was the earthly man, so are those who are of the earth. And as is the man from heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. And just as we have borne the likeness of the earthly man, so shall we bear the likeness of the man from heaven. The resurrection must have been a key event in Jewish history, apart from any theological implications. It was prophesied in the Bible at the time of the metaphorical story of creation in Genesis, at least 500 years before the resurrection happened. This means that if the creation story in Genesis was written approximately 500 to 1000 BCE, it also means that the prophecy of the resurrection was also written at the same time, because they occur in the same chapter and book. This is perhaps the first example in this talk of the allegories and mysteries which I mentioned earlier, and it is not an easy one, so it will require the second basic principle which I also mentioned before, a good deal of hard work and feedback from us to sort it all out. The background to this short verse is the Genesis creation story. The so-called first man and woman, Adam and Eve, have been tempted to eat the fruit from the tree, which God said they must not eat. The person or thing which is supposed to have persuaded them was a serpent. All of this is of course symbolic. Snakes don't speak, nor can they distinguish between right and wrong. There is also no such thing as a first man or first woman. Adam and Eve represent the arrival of humans to a state of self-awareness, morality and free will, in much the same way as a child will arrive at a state of adulthood. No one can say when Adam and Eve existed, in the same way as no human person can ever argue the exact time when a child has become an adult. All of this symbolism means something quite different to what it appears to our 21st century thinking, and is all explained in the book in greater detail if you want to examine it further. But for the purpose of this verse, here is the explanation. The I is God, you the enemy or serpent, the woman is Eve, your offspring the descendants of the snake, that is death, suffering and evil. Hers is Eve's descendants, that is all humans including Jesus. He is Jesus. Your head is a mortal blow to the serpent. You the adversary again. The striking of the heel, a non-mortal blow to Jesus. So if I rephrase the whole sentence, it reads something like this. I, the Hebrew God, will allow suffering, death and evil to come between you and the woman, and between your descendants and her descendants. A descendant of the woman will be temporarily bruised, because of this conflict, but he will inflict a mortal blow on all suffering, death and evil as a result. This mortal blow is of course the life, death and resurrection of Jesus, and it could only have been a fatal blow if Jesus was raised from the dead. If he had stayed dead, the permanent injury to suffering, death and evil would simply not have happened. This is a prophecy of victory, or it is a prophecy of nothing. Do we include a prophecy made over 500 years before it happened as one of the clues, mysteries and parables left at the crime scene of earth by the person or being which made it all in the first place? Or are we just desperately grasping at straws because we hope against hope for something better than this world? I think if we don't include it, then we are not very good detectives. And while we are looking at the Bible and theology, think about the question which I touched on briefly in part 2. Why bother with a bodily resurrection in the first place? Wouldn't it have been far easier to just preserve the soul or spirit of Jesus and discard the body? As far as the Bible is concerned, several people had survived their own death well before Jesus arrived on the scene. Enoch and Elijah had both been taken up to heaven by an unknown force. Moses and Elijah had appeared at the time that Jesus was having difficulties with coming to terms with his future painful death. Samuel had been contacted through a medium at the command of King Saul, even though the medium knew that the penalty for doing this was death, according to the law at the time. And Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were described by Jesus as being alive many hundreds of years after their death. I am fairly certain that there is an afterlife for a limited number of specially chosen adults, as well as children of course, but this has nothing to do with bodily resurrection, as in the case of Jesus. In Jesus' case, why not just discard the body and carry on living in spirit form, just like these other people I have just described? Was the inclusion of the body to reinforce the fact of the resurrection, as the appearance of a spirit or a ghost would have been easy to dismiss as hallucinations? For me, that doesn't take too much working out